Revenge office stories. The CFO's nephew, Chad, trashed my pitch in front of the entire board, and for a moment I felt utterly crushed. It was like watching my carefully constructed world crumble in slow motion. Every word he uttered chipping away at the foundation I'd built with countless sleepless nights and meticulous calculations. But he and the board missed one tiny clause in my proposal, buried in the fine print like a hidden dagger, a clause that let me turn the tables and seize control of the boardroom, transforming my humiliation into a symphony of strategic triumph. This isn't just a revenge story. It's about the hidden levers of power in the corporate jungle, the subtle threads of contracts and clauses that can bind even the most arrogant players, and how a quiet woman, underestimated and overlooked, can pull those levers when pushed too far, rewriting the rules of the game in her favor. For 5 long, grueling years, I was the unseen force at Visionary Solutions, a sprawling corporate giant that prided itself on being at the forefront of innovation while clinging stubbornly to outdated traditions. My name's Georgia, and as a senior systems analyst, I was a futurist in a woman's skin, navigating a world dominated by men who saw technology as a tool rather than a canvas for transformation. I specialized in weaving sustainable, hyper-efficient technologies into the company's aging infrastructure. Think massive, energy-hungry office towers that guzzled power like thirsty giants and data centers that hummed with inefficiency, wasting resources that could fund entire departments. My job was to make those beasts breathe more lightly, to optimize every circuit, every pipeline, every algorithm until the whole system ran like a well-oiled machine on a fraction of the energy. It was like playing three-dimensional chess against waste, inefficiency, and the relentless march of entropy, and I loved every intricate move, every late-night breakthrough that turned chaos into elegance. I was damn good at it, too. My projects didn't just meet expectations. They shattered them. They consistently came in under budget, sometimes by margins that made the finance team do double takes, and they over-delivered on returns, generating savings that rippled through the company's bottom line like a positive shockwave. But I'm a quiet professional by nature. I don't seek the spotlight, don't parade my successes in meetings or happy hours. I let my work speak for itself, believing naively that in a merit-based world, results would be enough. At Visionary Solutions, however, the culture was different. This was a company built on decades of tradition, with roots in the industrial era where boardrooms echoed with the ghosts of deals sealed over cigars and handshakes. It was run by men who trusted their gut instincts over cold data, who valued charisma, bravado, and connections far more than the quiet precision of spreadsheets and simulations. In that environment, my subtle approach often meant I was overlooked, my contributions credited to louder voices, or simply forgotten in the rush of corporate politics. Our CEO, Mr. Harrison, was the epitome of the old guard incarnate. A towering figure in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a voice that boomed like thunder. He'd been with the company since the days of fax machines and rotary phones. His motto was, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," a phrase he'd utter with a wry smile during strategy sessions, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who'd weathered economic storms and market crashes. But beneath that skepticism was a pragmatic core. Show him undeniable profits, backed by irrefutable evidence, and he'd listen. He wasn't unreasonable. He was cautious, a man who'd built his career on calculated risks rather than wild gambles. The real gatekeeper, however, was our CFO, Mr. Davies, a sharp-eyed accountant in his 50s with a perpetual furrow in his brow and a calculator that seemed fused to his hand. Where Harrison was pragmatic, Davies was dogmatic, treating the company's finances like a sacred text that only he could interpret. Every new proposal was viewed not as an opportunity for growth, but as a potential threat to his perfectly balanced books, a disruption that could tip the scales into chaos. Getting a project past him was like trying to carry water in a sieve. Every drop of logic seemed to slip through, leaving you empty-handed and frustrated. He'd pore over budgets with a red pen, slashing lines and questioning assumptions until even the most solid ideas felt flimsy. Then there was Chad, Davies' nephew, the living embodiment of everything wrong with the system. Chad didn't even have an official title or a dedicated spot on the organizational chart. He was simply granted an informal consultancy role, which translated to a laminated security pass, unrestricted access to meetings, and a license to meddle wherever he pleased. Fresh out of a prestigious business school, likely one his family's donations had paved the way for, he carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences in his life. In his mid-20s, with perfectly gelled hair, designer suits that screamed privilege, and a perpetual smirk that suggested he knew something you didn't, Chad would drift through departments like a self-appointed oracle. He'd dish out unsolicited advice on everything from marketing strategies to IT protocols, his voice dripping with condescension, as if his Ivy League degree made him an expert in fields he'd barely skimmed in a textbook. He was nepotism personified, a smirking reminder that at Visionary Solutions, who you knew was infinitely more important than what you knew, and family ties could catapult you past years of hard-earned experience. For the last 8 months, I had poured my entire professional life, and honestly, much of my personal one, into one monumental project. Codename Project Nightingale. It was the culmination of everything I knew, a comprehensive, top-to-bottom overhaul of our entire operational infrastructure. Imagine retrofitting our sprawling office complexes with smart glass that adjusted to sunlight for optimal energy use, integrating geothermal heating systems to slash utility bills, and redesigning our logistics networks with predictive AI that anticipated disruptions before they happened. It wasn't just about going green. It was about making Visionary Solutions a beacon of efficiency in an industry plagued by waste. According to my models, which I'd refined through hundreds of iterations, it would save the company over $100 million in the first 5 years alone, all while positioning us as an industry leader in corporate sustainability, attracting eco-conscious clients and talent. The proposal was my magnum opus, a 200-page behemoth filled with diagrams, simulations, and financial projections that I'd built from the ground up. I worked 17-hour days, fueled by black coffee and sheer determination, sacrificing weekends and evenings to triple-check every calculation, run endless simulations until my computer fans whined in protest, and craft financial models so robust they could withstand even Mr. Davies's most apocalyptic scrutiny. I consulted with external experts, pored over industry reports, and even built contingency plans for every conceivable risk, from supply chain delays to regulatory changes. The project was sound, more than sound. It was brilliant, a blueprint for the future that could transform Visionary Solutions from a lumbering giant into a nimble innovator. All I had to do was convince the board. The pitch was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and I spent the preceding weekend rehearsing in front of a mirror, anticipating every possible question, every objection, every skeptical glance. I was ready, armed with data and passion, or so I thought. The boardroom at Visionary Solutions was on the top floor, a cavernous space of gleaming glass walls and polished mahogany tables that seemed designed to make anyone presenting feel small and exposed, like a gladiator in an arena surrounded by judgmental emperors. That Tuesday morning, the room's intimidating aura was in full effect. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the table where the 10 board members sat arranged like a tribunal, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright boredom. Mr. Harrison occupied the head of the table, his chair slightly elevated, his face an unreadable mask of corporate stoicism, his fingers steepled as if already weighing the scales of judgment. To his right sat Mr. Davies, the CFO, already frowning at my title slide projected on the massive screen behind me, as if the mere words Project Nightingale had personally insulted his sense of fiscal responsibility. And in a chair pushed against the back wall, directly in my line of sight, sat Chad. He was slouched casually, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. The very picture of board entitlement, as if this high-stakes meeting was just another tedious interruption in his charmed life. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the room press down on me, and started my presentation. My voice was steady despite the hammering in my chest, the adrenaline surging through my veins like electricity. I began with the executive summary, laying out the problems with our current setup in clear, compelling terms. Spiraling energy costs that were eating into profits quarter after quarter, regulatory risks from upcoming environmental laws that could slap us with fines in the millions, and missed opportunities in a market where sustainability was no longer a buzzword, but a business imperative. I backed it all up with charts and graphs, real data from our own operations, showing how our inefficiency was bleeding us dry. I saw some of the younger board members, those in their 40s, perhaps more attuned to modern trends, nodding along, their eyes lighting up as they connected the dots. Encouraged, I moved seamlessly to the solution. Project Nightingale. I didn't just show them the data. I told a story, weaving a narrative of a transformed visionary solutions, a company that wasn't just surviving, but thriving in the 21st century. I displayed stunning renderings of retrofitted buildings with adaptive smart glass that tinted automatically to reduce cooling needs, flowcharts of AI-driven logistics that predicted supply chain bottlenecks days in advance, and 5-year financial projections that illustrated not just cost savings, but revenue growth from green certifications and partnerships. When the head of operations, a gruff man named Mr. Thompson, questioned the potential downtime during implementation, I flipped to a detailed, phased rollout plan, complete with timelines and mitigation strategies that ensured zero disruption to daily business. When the marketing director, Ms. Ellis, asked about the PR value, I presented a comprehensive media strategy, including case studies of similar projects that had boosted brand reputation and stock prices for competitors. I was holding my own, fielding questions with confidence, watching the momentum shift in my favor. Mr. Harrison was leaning forward now, his steepled fingers relaxing slightly, a sign that I was piercing his armor of skepticism. I was winning them over one slide at a time. Then a voice from the back cut through the air like a knife. "Sorry, can we just pause for a second?" It was Chad. He'd finally put his phone down and was leaning forward, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of interruption. Every head in the room turned to him, a ripple of nervous energy spreading like a wave. He wasn't on the board, had no official right to speak, but no one stopped him. His uncle's eyes were fixed on him, and Mr. Davies's silence was a clear signal of approval, a tacit endorsement that amplified Chad's informal power. "I'm just not seeing the wow factor," he said, making exaggerated air quotes with his fingers, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "This all seems academic. Lots of charts and graphs, Georgia. Where's the vision? It feels like a vanity project, something cooked up in a lab rather than the real world." A hush fell over the room, the kind of uncomfortable silence that follows a social faux pas at a dinner party. The younger board members who'd been nodding now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at Davies for cues. Chad's words weren't a substantive critique. They were a poison dart aimed at my credibility, reframing my meticulous, data-driven proposal as some flighty, impractical dream. I kept my cool, drawing on years of dealing with dismissive colleagues, my voice even and professional. "The vision, Chad," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "is in the $100 million savings over 5 years. It's in future-proofing this company against rising energy prices and environmental regulations. The vision is the bottom line, backed by solid projections and real-world precedents." He chuckled, a low, mocking sound that echoed off the glass walls. $100 million projected, he shot back, as if I'd just invented the word, his emphasis laced with doubt. "We've all seen projections before. They're just educated guesses. What I see is a massive $50 million upfront cost for, what? Solar panels and fancy light bulbs? My uncle," he gestured lazily toward Davies, "could get a better return playing the market with that money without all the risk." Mr. Davies allowed a small, tight smile to creep across his face, his eyes narrowing in approval. The poison was working its way through the room. Chad didn't need to attack my data head-on. He didn't have the expertise for that. Instead, he was attacking me, painting me as an idealistic woman with her head in the clouds. Her pet project, a frivolous distraction from the serious business of making money. The board members who had been engaged now looked uncertain, studying their notes or the table as if avoiding my eyes. "This isn't about solar panels, Chad," I tried to explain, pulling up a slide on the geothermal exchange system to illustrate my point. "It's a holistic systems overhaul. The geothermal exchange alone would reduce heating costs by 40%, with a payback period of under 3 years. It's not a gamble. It's a calculated investment based on proven technologies." He cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand, leaning back in his chair as if the conversation bored him. Yeah, I get it. It's very green, trendy stuff. But are we a tech incubator or a company that makes money? This seems like a huge gamble on one analyst's pet project. We need real strategies, not eco-fantasies. He sat back, triumphant, crossing his arms with a satisfied nod. He'd done his job. The seed of doubt was planted, sprouting rapidly in the fertile soil of the board's risk aversion. The atmosphere in the room had curdled, the positive momentum I'd built evaporating like morning mist. Harrison, who hated any whiff of uncertainty, straightened up, his expression closing off. "Thank you for the presentation, Georgia," Harrison said flatly, his voice carrying the finality of a gavel. "You've given us a lot to consider. We'll take this under advisement." And that was it. Under advisement was corporate speak for dead on arrival, a polite burial for ideas that threatened the status quo. The pitch was over, my magnum opus executed, not by logic or data, but by a smirking princeling who'd never worked a real day in his life. I gathered my papers, my hand shaking slightly from the surge of adrenaline and rage, forcing a professional smile as I nodded to the board. As I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, I heard Chad laughing with one of the board members, a casual, victorious chuckle that twisted like a knife in my gut. I didn't just feel defeated. I felt erased, my expertise dismissed, my voice silenced in a room full of power players who'd rather listen to nepotism than reason. The next few days were a gray, suffocating blur, a haze of disappointment that clung to me like fog. I'd sit at my desk in the open plan office at Visionary Solutions, staring blankly at my monitor, the beautiful renderings and intricate diagrams of Project Nightingale now mocking me with their unfulfilled potential. Colleagues would pass by with sympathetic glances or awkward small talk, but the whispers were louder. "That's the woman whose big project got shot down in the boardroom." The humiliation was a physical weight on my shoulders, a constant ache that made every step feel heavier. Chad, of course, was more visible than ever, swaggering through the hallways like a conquering hero, making a point to walk past my desk with that signature smirk, as if basking in the glory of his kill. He hadn't just defeated a project. He'd asserted his dominance, proving that his uncle's influence could crush even the most prepared presentations. I seriously considered quitting. The thought consumed me during lunch breaks and commutes, my mind racing through scenarios of handing in my notice, updating my resume on LinkedIn, and browsing job listings for companies that might value substance over spectacle. Anything to escape the injustice that was suffocating me. My project wasn't flawed. The system was rigged, a labyrinth of politics where data took a backseat to personal alliances and egos. That Saturday, I was at home in my small apartment, the rain drumming relentlessly against the windows in a miserable drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. The world outside was a watercolor smear of grays and blues, and inside, I paced restlessly before settling on the couch with my laptop. For some reason, perhaps a form of self-punishment or desperate nostalgia, I opened the final PDF of the Nightingale proposal. I scrolled past the executive summary, the vibrant renderings that once filled me with pride, the endless financial models I'd labored over. My finger just kept pressing the down arrow, flying through the document in a numb trance. I got deep into the appendices, the boring part no one ever reads, filled with technical specs, vendor agreements, risk protocols, and the kind of fine print that makes eyes glaze over. And then I saw it. It was tucked away in Appendix C, Section 4, Subsection B, a clause I had written myself almost as an afterthought, adapted from a template I'd used on a smaller government contract years ago. I'd included it out of habit, a precautionary measure to cover all bases in case of partial rejections. The heading was innocuous, Clause 11.7, Phased Implementation and Independent Review. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart starting to pound as the words came into focus. I read them once, then again, the implications unfolding like a flower in bloom. In the event that the full project proposal is not approved, the proposing party retains the right to trigger an independent, third-party review of any single discrete phase at the proposing party's discretion. Review will be conducted by a mutually agreed-upon, industry-certified external auditor. Costs to be covered by the company's active R&D budget. If the independent review validates the proposing party's original projections within a 10% margin of error, the findings are considered binding, and the executive committee is authorized and required to approve and fund the immediate implementation of said phase. The rain outside seemed to stop, the world narrowing to the glow of my screen. The fog in my head cleared, replaced by a sharp, brilliant light of realization. This was it. This was the secret weapon, a bureaucratic judo, move hidden in plain sight. They hadn't read it. Of course they hadn't. Why would they? Harrison and the board focused on top-line numbers and big-picture risks, skimming the appendices if they bothered at all. Davies was too fixated on the $50 million price tag to delve into the contractual weeds. And Chad? He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the boardroom glass to read anything beyond the executive summary. Their arrogance had blinded them to the details, and now those details were my salvation. The clause was a masterpiece of foresight, a tool to bypass the boardroom's political theater and appeal to a higher authority, an independent, objective expert armed with facts and figures. It took the power from the subjective whims of the board and handed it to the executive committee, who would be legally bound by the results of the review. No debates or egos involved. And the best part, I got to choose the phase for review. I could pick Phase 1, Data Center Migration, the cheapest segment at just $200,000, a mere rounding error in the company's R&D budget. But it packed a punch. My models showed it would pay for itself in 6 months, slashing server energy costs by 70% through optimized cooling and AI load balancing. It was the first domino in the chain, a low-risk entry point that could prove the viability of the entire project. The despair I'd been wallowing in evaporated like steam, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard determination that surged through me like a current. I sat up straighter, my mind racing through the implications, planning my next moves with the precision of a chess grandmaster. I was done being quiet, done letting nepotism and gut feelings dictate my fate. I wasn't going to fight them with opinions, influence, or emotional appeals. I was going to drag them onto my turf. Facts, figures, and unbreakable contractual obligations. This clause wasn't just a loophole. It was a lifeline, a way to reclaim my voice and force the company to reckon with the merit of my work. Monday morning, I walked into the Visionary Solutions headquarters a different woman. Gone was the slumped posture of defeat. I held my head high, my steps purposeful, ignoring the lingering whispers in the hallways and the curious glances from colleagues who'd heard about the pitch's failure. Chad caught my eye as I passed his uncle's office, giving me a pitying look as if deciding whether to put a wounded animal out of its misery. But I didn't acknowledge him. I sat at my desk, opened my email client, and began typing with steady fingers. The email was short, formal, and cold as steel. It was addressed to Harrison, Davies, and the entire board with the subject line, Invocation of Clause 11.7 regarding Project Nightingale. In the body I wrote, Dear board members, as per the terms outlined in the project, Nightingale proposal. Appendix C, Section 4, Subsection B, Clause 11.7. I am formally exercising my right to trigger an independent, third-party review. The selected phase is Phase 1, Data Center Migration. I've attached the relevant section for your convenience and am prepared to discuss the selection of an auditor at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Georgia. I hit send, the whoosh of the email leaving my outbox feeling like the first shot in a war they didn't even know had started. My heart raced, but it was with excitement now, not fear. 30 minutes later, an urgent email from Harrison's assistant popped up. Emergency board meeting. Today, 2 p.m. Your attendance is mandatory. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The trap was sprung. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into the same boardroom where I'd been humiliated just days before. The air was electric with tension, the sunlight now casting harsh shadows that accentuated the furrowed brows and tight lips around the table. Davies looked like he'd swallowed a hornet, his face red with barely contained fury. Chad was in his usual spot against the wall, but the lazy smirk was gone, replaced by a wary confusion, his eyes darting around as if sensing the shift in the room's power dynamic. I didn't go to the presenter's podium this time. Instead, I took a vacant seat at the table itself, right across from the CFO, claiming my place among them as an equal. Harrison started without preamble, his voice tight with authority. Georgia, I think you have some explaining to do. Davies couldn't hold back. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. This is an outrage, a procedural trick, an absurd interpretation of a footnote in some appendix no one even read. I kept my voice calm, almost placid, channeling the inner steel I'd forged over years of being underestimated. My eyes locked on Harrison, the decision-maker. With all due respect, Mr. Davies, it's not an interpretation. It's the plainly written text of a clause in a document submitted for board review 8 weeks ago. It's a contractual provision, and by not objecting to it during the review period, you've implicitly agreed to its terms. I am formally invoking it. I slid 10 printed copies of Appendix C across the table, Clause 11.7 highlighted in bright yellow for emphasis, the words standing out like a beacon. This is ridiculous, Davies sputtered, his voice rising in pitch, his usual composure cracking under the pressure. You can't force a $50 million project on this company through a loophole. This is insubordination, plain and simple. I'm not, I replied calmly, unflinching. I'm invoking my right to a review of Phase 1 alone, which has an implementation cost of just $200,000. The funds for the review itself, as the clause clearly stipulates, come from the existing R&D budget. No new allocations are needed. It's all within approved parameters. I let that sink in, watching the board members flip through the pages, their expressions shifting from anger to reluctant acknowledgement as they read the unambiguous language. The clause was ironclad, written in precise legal terms that left no room for wiggling. And if this review happens, Harrison asked, his eyes narrowed not with annoyance, but with a new spark, intrigue, perhaps even respect for the boldness of my play. If the independent auditors we select together validate my projections within the specified 10% margin, I said, meeting his gaze steadily, the clause is crystal clear. The findings are binding, and the executive committee is required to approve and fund the immediate implementation of that phase. The full board's vote is no longer part of the equation for the segment. Stunned silence enveloped the room, the kind that follows a revelation. I had just legally sidestepped their authority, turning their own oversight, or lack thereof, against them. From the back wall, Chad finally found his voice, his tone laced with disbelief and a hint of panic. This is insane. You can't just. That's enough, Chad. Harrison's voice cracked like a whip, cutting him off mid-sentence. He didn't even bother to look at the young man, his focus remaining on me. The color drained from Chad's face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. All his borrowed authority, his smug entitlement, evaporated in an instant. He was just a kid on the sidelines now, suddenly and painfully irrelevant. Mr. Davies tried one last desperate gambit, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The spirit of the agreement was never to allow something like this. This is a perversion of the process. I cut him off, my voice still calm, but now edged with unyielding steel, the culmination of months of frustration. The spirit of the agreement, Mr. Davies, was that this project would be judged on its merits, on the data and projections I presented. That didn't happen in the initial pitch, thanks in part to interruptions that derailed the discussion. This clause ensures that at least one part of it will be judged on cold, hard facts, free from bias or personal agendas. I am simply enforcing the terms you all had the opportunity to review and amend. The room hung in tension, the board members exchanging glances, realizing they were outmaneuvered. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Davies's furious expression, then Chad's humiliated one, and finally landing on me, the quiet analyst who had just checkmated the entire board. A slow smile spread across his face, not warm or friendly, but predatory, the smile of a man who appreciated a well-played game, even when he was on the losing side. The meeting ended in a state of shocked disbelief, the board members filing out in a murmur of hushed conversations and sidelong glances. Davies shot me a look of pure venom before storming out, his footsteps echoing down the hall like thunder. But it was an empty glare, powerless rage from a man who'd been outplayed on his own field. Chad slunk away without a word, his shoulders slumped, the once confident princeling reduced to a shadow. I packed my folder methodically, my hands perfectly steady this time, a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest as I walked out. I didn't look back at Chad. He was no longer a factor, his influence shattered like glass. A top-tier auditing firm was selected within days, a firm Mr. Davies insisted on, no doubt hoping their infamous rigor and conservative approach would uncover some flaw in my work, some exaggeration in my projections that could salvage his pride. It was a foolish hope, born of desperation. I had built Project Nightingale to be bulletproof, every assumption stress-tested, every variable accounted for. The auditors dove in with forensic precision, scrutinizing my models, running their own simulations and cross-referencing data with industry benchmarks. The day their report was delivered, the executive committee convened in a smaller, more utilitarian conference room, away from the grandeur of the boardroom. The auditors presented their findings in a dry, dispassionate tone, their slides filled with charts and analyses that mirrored my own, but with an added layer of third-party validation. The result was even better than I'd hoped. Not only were my projections validated, the auditors found I had been too conservative in my estimates. They confirmed the $200,000 investment in Phase 1 would likely pay for itself in 4 months, not 6, with energy savings exceeding my predictions by 15% due to advancements in AI optimization they'd factored in. The report was a glowing, undeniable vindication, a document that laid bare the merit of my work in black and white. Mr. Davies sat in stony silence throughout, his face a mask of thunderous defeat, his fingers clenched around a pen that he never used. Harrison, ever the pragmatist, nodded along, his expression one of quiet approval. "The findings are binding," Harrison said simply once the presentation ended, turning to the COO. "Get it done. Give Georgia whatever resources she needs to implement Phase 1 immediately." The fallout was swift and merciless. Chad's informal consultancy was formally terminated the very next day, his security pass deactivated by security personnel who escorted him out with polite efficiency. Whispers in the office suggested he ended up in a junior marketing role at some mid-tier company where his father held a stake, a far cry from the boardroom access he'd abused. He was a symbol of the board's failure, a liability they couldn't afford to keep, his downfall a quiet but satisfying echo of the arrogance that had started it all. Mr. Davies's downfall was quieter but more profound, a slow erosion of power that left him isolated. He wasn't fired outright, That would have been too dramatic for a company like Visionary Solutions, but he was neutered, his credibility shot to pieces. He, the great guardian of the company's finances, had missed a clause with multi-million-dollar implications because he'd let his nephew's ego cloud his judgment, allowing personal bias to override professional duty. Harrison soon announced the formation of a new strategic oversight committee to review all major capital expenditures, a public stripping of Davies's core authority that relegated him to rubber-stamping decisions rather than making them. 6 months later, under the guise of early retirement, he left the company, his farewell email a bland formality that masked the bitterness of his exit. Phase 1 was implemented flawlessly, a testament to the planning I'd poured into it. Teams of engineers and IT specialists worked under my direction, installing real-time energy dashboards that became an instant fascination across the company. You could literally watch our costs plummet on interactive screens in the lobby, the numbers ticking down like a countdown to victory. The savings weren't theoretical. They were real, tangible figures on the balance sheet, boosting quarterly reports and earning praise from shareholders who'd long complained about operational bloat. The success of Phase 1 was so dramatic, so incontrovertible, that the rest of Project Nightingale became an inevitability. The board, once skeptical, greenlit the subsequent phases not with reluctance, but with enthusiasm, their earlier doubts washed away by the flood of positive data. Meetings that had once been battlegrounds became collaborative sessions, with board members seeking my input on everything from vendor selections to timeline adjustments. A month after the auditor's report, Harrison called me to his office on the top floor, the view of the city skyline no longer intimidating but empowering. He gestured for me to sit, his expression one of genuine regard rather than the patronizing tolerance of before. "Georgia," he began, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "I misjudged you. Badly. I thought you were just a numbers person, a technician crunching data in the background. I was wrong. You're a strategist, someone who understands not just the technology, but how this place really works, the politics, the contracts, the levers of power." He paused, letting the words hang, then continued, "I'm creating a new division, the Division of Strategic Innovation. It will report directly to me, bypassing the usual hierarchies. Its purpose is to identify and implement the next generation of efficiencies for this company, from sustainability initiatives to AI integrations. I want you to run it." I was stunned, the offer hitting me like a wave. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a coronation, a recognition that elevated me from the shadows to the forefront. "Project Nightingale," he added, "will be the first official mandate of your new division. See it through to completion and build on it." My first day as Vice President of Strategic Innovation was surreal. I had a new corner office with a view that rivaled Harrison's, a dedicated team of hand-picked experts, and a budget that gave me the freedom to innovate without constant scrutiny. The whispers in the hallways changed too, no longer pitying, but admiring, colleagues approaching me with ideas and congratulations. Looking back on it all, it's easy to label it as revenge, a petty settling of scores against Chad's arrogance and Davies's obstructionism. And maybe in those initial moments of discovery, it was fueled by that fire. But it evolved into something more profound, a fight for the principle that competence should matter more than connections, that data and foresight should be more powerful than dogma and nepotism. I won not by shouting louder or playing the political game on their terms, but by being smarter, by mastering the details they ignored. I didn't engage in their arena of egos and influence. I forced them to play in mine, a game of precision, contracts, and irrefutable facts. And in the end, the quiet woman, the one they dismissed as just an analyst, proved that the pen is mightier than the sword, especially when it's hidden in the fine print, waiting to strike. Workplace power dynamics can be a treacherous minefield, full of hidden pitfalls and uneven playing fields. But sometimes the key to victory isn't a loud confrontation or a dramatic showdown. It's a single clause, a forgotten detail that shifts the balance. If this tale of corporate chess, strategic patience, and quiet triumph resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories of navigating boardroom battles and outsmarting the system. And tell me in the comments, what's a time you had to use the rules of the game to outsmart the players, turning a setback into a stunning comeback? Thanks for reading.